Welcome to the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in critical times. Here's your host, Bill Kelly.
Welcome to another edition of the Bill Kelly Podcast, critical discussions in these very critical times. I'm your host, Bill Kelly. Good to have you with us today. Like many people in the country, we're kind of taking a deep breath now and exhaling after a very busy, very hectic political week here in this country, as budget weeks oftentimes are. You know, the government of the day, in this case, the Carney government, presenting their budget. And this is almost a field day for the opposition parties. It's like a free kick, in soccer. Because what happens is the opposition parties get this open opportunity right now to criticize the government's budget, say you're not spending enough here, you're spending way too much over here. The deficit, my God, look at the numbers of the deficit. And Pierre Poilievre must have just been licking his chops, ready to do, and has to go after these guys. And heaven knows he's got a free platform to do that, with the right-leaning media in this country, the Global News and Bell Media, CTV News, and all the post-media newspapers, of course, the Sun newspapers, National Post. They give this guy a platform and pretty much say, whatever he says gets printed. They don't fact-check or anything like this. So this was going to be great. Poilievre must have just been salivating. This is fabulous. Well, a funny thing happened on the way, and that was something that changed the narrative very dramatically, and that was consensus that there seems to be an awful lot of problems within the Conservative caucus. And that manifested itself this on budget day with a floor crossing. A member of Parliament from Nova Scotia, Conservative member of Parliament, crossed the floor, Chris d'Entremont, who had been a Conservative and elected since 2019, crossed the floor. At first, the story was that he was going to just leave the party, the Conservative caucus. Then we got the full-blown story here that he was actually joining the Liberal caucus. In fact, later that day, he appeared with Prime Minister Carney to answer some questions. How could this be happening? Well, we're starting, as the week went on, to get some tidbits of information about just how this came to pass. It's not something that happens a lot, but it has happened before. We mentioned this on a previous podcast. Some high-profile folks have changed parties over the years. Scott Bryson was a Conservative in the Maritimes. He jumped onto the Paul Martin government. Belinda Stronach did the same sort of thing. It's happened in so many other different circumstances, and it's gone both ways. And it's problematic, especially in Poilievre's case here, because this is a guy who's trying, I guess, to make a name for himself. He sees the polls that indicate that people still just don't like this guy. And the economic challenges that we're facing right now have been, an opportunity for him to try to, move the public opinion about exactly what he's like. Maybe you're not like me, but you're going to love our policies. Well, that got sidetracked altogether, because within 24 hours of the story about the floor crossing, the narrative now was about the infighting that's going on in the Conservative caucus. The budget, yeah, that's important. Yeah, there's a budget vote on that. Yeah, but who's crossing the floor today? Who's not going to cross the floor today? That became the story of the day. And when the opposition parties don't control the narrative, when all of a sudden they're saying, hey, look over me, I want to talk about this. Yeah. Poilievre, anytime he got himself in front of a microphone, wanted to talk about the deficit, wanted to talk about the details of the budget. And all anybody would ask him about is, what about the floor crossing? What about Chris d'Entremont? What about the story about the fact that we're told, anyway, that there are more Conservatives that are considering crossing and becoming members of the Liberal caucus. So all of a sudden, Poilievre is not controlling the narrative anymore, and he's not getting his message across. Got to be a very frustrating circumstance. It couldn't happen to a nicer guy or a more deserving guy, I guess. But it's fascinating to see just how this unfolded, and it's been going on for some time. And Prime Minister Carney alluded to this, and so did Mr. d'Entremont as well, that this wasn't a spur of the moment thing. I guess discussions have been going on for quite some time, and now we're starting to get some stories about how this was actually not just transpiring, but how it was received by other members of the Conservative Party. Apparently, Andrew Scheer and others went into the office, and now, according to Mr. d'Entremont, there was some yelling, screaming, and shoving back and forth. Conservatives, of course, others, Scheer and others, will deny that ever happened. Be that as it may, there was certainly a confrontation in his office, which he said just really seemed to underscore the need for him to get out of that Conservative caucus altogether, which he eventually did just a couple of hours after that. But the fallout from this is ongoing. And all of a sudden, the narrative now becomes Poilievre's leadership and Poilievre's place within that Conservative caucus. Now, publicly, those who have spoken out about this, a number of MPs, long-term Conservative MPs, including Scheer and others, have said, no, we're united. We're standing strongly behind our guy. Poilievre is our guy. He's our leader, yada, 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 right? And I guess, in front of the microphones, that's what they're supposed to say. I guess they're kind of hoping that Chris D'Entremont would be saying that too, but that wasn't the case. But let's talk about the reality here. And this goes all the way back to last spring and the election that occurred where Poilievre, as we all know now, had a 22-point lead, I think it was, in the popular polls in just about every national poll, and looked like he was going to cruise to victory in the federal election. Well, a funny thing happened on the way to that particular party, too. Mark Carney stepped in, became leader of the Liberal Party, and guided that party, of course, to an election victory, albeit a minority government. But Poilievre and his fall from grace was monumental. He even lost his seat, of course, in Ottawa and had to run in a by-election out in Alberta this past summer and finally got himself a seat there. We all know that's history that I think is very important and contextualizes what's happening here. But even during the initial campaign, the spring campaign that eventually led to Poilievre's downfall, we heard anecdotally from people on the campaign trail, and certainly from, as the election unfolded, some Conservative candidates who were unsuccessful in getting seats, an awful lot of criticism they heard at the doors. You go knocking on doors and you're looking for somebody's vote, and an awful lot of them said they got an earful from constituents, voters right across the country, about Poilievre. We don't like the guy. We don't like his attitude. We don't like his style. We just don't like the guy. And that was something that I think resonated with an awful lot of voters. And the public opinion polls that we referenced over the last couple of months really kind of underscored this time and time again. That people just said, we just don't like the guy. The one that really stuck out for me was a poll that came out in the summer, and we talked about this on the podcast, that said that an alarmingly high number of Canadians, I think it was like 67% or something, said that they would be embarrassed if Pierre Poilievre was the leader of this country and had to go out on the world stage and talk about Canada. They just don't like the guy. They don't trust the guy. So it doesn't surprise me that Chris D'Entremont said he heard that a lot at the doors during that election. Now, he got voted in anyway, although it was apparently by a reduced margin. But we're hearing that from other candidates as well. Now, they can try to shove that under the carpet, but that's the reality. Well, along comes just hours later yet another story, an Alberta MP, Matt Genero, who all of a sudden resigned, not just from the Tory caucus, but from his seat as a member of Parliament. Now, he apparently was one of the Conservatives that was rumored to be considering crossing the floor and become a part of the Liberal caucus. It didn't happen that way, and there's all kinds of speculation going on in Ottawa these days about what did happen. Did the party leadership get wind of that? Did they try to corner him and coerce him? We're told that there's some pretty strong tactics to try to whip everybody back into line and just say no more of this floor crossing. Not going to happen, because at one time they were talking about as many as maybe 3, 4, 5 people from the Conservative caucus switching sides, which is unheard of. But the fact that those rumors are out there, I think really I kind of substantiates the feeling that many people have here, that Conservatives, even within that Conservative caucus on Parliament Hill, don't like their leader. They don't trust him. I mean, the question you have to ask yourself as a backbencher, for instance, and even in opposition, is this the person that we need that's going to lead us to victory? Well, they thought so last year, and you saw the results of the spring election. That wasn't going to happen. And you see the way that he's continued to languish in the bottom parts of the polls these days, that I can understand that an awful lot of Conservatives are really questioning whether or not Poilievre should be the person in charge of this party right now, or be the face of this party right now. And that seemed to be the mindset, certainly was for Chris D'Entremont, but also for Matt Genero, who all of a sudden decided not just was he leaving caucus, he was quitting Parliament. Now, he's not going to apparently leave until next summer. But that raises some questions, too. And again, some of the Liberal insiders are saying that, well, this has been going on for quite some time. Some of the party insiders on the Conservative side are saying absolutely no, that the Liberals are playing dirty pool here. Well, there's always been talk about trying to swing people over to the other side. It happened in the 2005 election when Stephen Harper finally did beat the Liberals in a minority situation. And Lawrence Cannon, who was actually cabinet minister in the Paul Martin government, was reelected as a Liberal. And lo and behold, just a couple of days after the election, decided to walk across and become a conservative, and was immediately placed into the Harper cabinet. So it does go on, which begs the question: why is it okay if your team does it, but it's terrible and unconstitutional if the other team does? I mean, it's the way the game is played. It's not one of the nicer sides. It's not one of the pretty sides of politics, but it does occur, and oftentimes. We hear later on that there were incentives offered. Hey, you can get a cabinet post, or you can get this, or you can get that, whatever the case might be. For heaven's sakes, it happened to Poilievre himself when he convinced, I'll use those terms in air quotes, a very successful member of parliament from Alberta in that last election to step aside so he could run in that by-election. And that guy apparently got a nice plum job, a well-paying job outside of politics for the short term, although who knows what's going to happen in the next election. So it's maybe part of the dirty underbelly of politics, but it does happen. So the fact that the conservatives are crying foul about this is really, really somewhat hypocritical, because they play the game at the same time. They just didn't have the opportunity to do it here. So what does this tell us about what's going to happen politically in the future here? It's interesting to see just how this is going to unfold in the next little while. And it raises questions about whether or not more, in fact, people are going to cross the floor and there's going to be more defections. From Mr. Genero's situation, we're told now that he's decided, well, he's finished with politics, and he just wants to spend more time with his family, which is something that we often hear from people when they want to step aside from politics. But if that was the case, and we're told that actually he's in a family who bought a house in British Columbia and they're simply going to move over there. But the records I saw late last week indicated that the family actually purchased that house earlier this year. So if that was their intention, then why did he even run for re-election in Alberta if he knew he was going to actually resign and move to British Columbia? So, was there some coercion going on there within the Conservative caucus? Maybe. Seems to think that way, and a lot of people seem to consider that maybe that's the sort of pressure that was being put on him too. But it does, I think, raise some questions about Poilievre's leadership once again. And that's the story. Whether the Conservatives like it or not, it's not about the budget. The budget has already gone through 2 votes and passed, and they're dark in Parliament Hill this week, of course, because of Remembrance Day week. But they are going to come back. And there will be a third vote, which is probably going to result in the budget passing, and they'll move on and start doing the business of running governments until their Christmas break. So that's going to happen. That seems almost to be a certainty at this stage. But the other story here is what we've talked about since the last election, is the leadership review that's going to occur in January. And that, of course, puts Pierre Poilievre right smack back in the spotlight. Well, he's been trying desperately to improve his standing within the party. I think it's a lost cause for him to try to improve his standing within the Canadian community. People just don't like the guy for a variety of reasons. But he figures if he can, he can solidify his support within the party and get a resounding victory and a thumbs up from the people that are going to be voting in that leadership review, then maybe that'll put him back on the path. I'm not so sure that's the case, because we heard that after he was, defeated in the federal election, and even before he was successful in that by-election that got him back into the Commons, that it might be a different Pierre Poilievre, a quieter, maybe more civil-minded Poilievre, who is going to actually, show some respect for the institution and for the opposition and others elected in that. Well, no, that never happened. As a matter of fact, some would suggest that he's even, deeper into that acerbic attitude that he's worn on his sleeve so many years now. And that's turned off an awful lot of people, not just nationally, but within the Conservative caucus, too. Is it going to cause him to lose the leadership review? I don't think so, for a variety of reasons. And it's not necessarily because there's a lot of love for Poilievre within the Conservative caucus. But right now, there don't seem to be any alternatives. Nobody else is jumping up and saying, hey, I can run that party. I can do a better job. A lot of them may be thinking it, but I don't see anybody coming forward right now, because that would be, in their minds, scandalous and the sort of thing that they're trying to quash at this stage. They don't want anybody jumping up and saying, maybe we could do better than Pierre Poilievre as a leader of our party. So that's an important element of this, but I don't think it's going to be a true indicator as to just how much support there is within that caucus right now for Pierre Poilievre. And that's not the sort of thing that any opposition leader, that any leader of any political party wants to be able to fight on a consistent basis. If you got to have the team on your side, and if you don't, if they're throwing darts at you behind your back, you got a problem, especially when it comes to working in a situation like this. Now, the numbers game comes into play here too, especially from the standpoint of Chris d'Entremont, who is now in the Liberal caucus. That's one less vote, of course, for the opposition parties, one more vote for the Liberals. Now, the suggestion earlier this week that there could be 2, 3, maybe even 4 or 5 more conservatives or other members, some suggesting even the NDP that may want to cross over, indicated that, wow, if this thing really started to snowball, the Liberals could end up with a majority. And how would that look? And again, the conservatives are saying, well, that's unconstitutional. That's playing with the rules. No, it's very, very constitutional. It's part of the parliamentary system. Don't fall for that gimmick that they always say. That's another Trump trick. Oh, it's against the law. No, it's not. It's within the Constitution, especially in our Constitution, that parties and members of the Parliament can cross some floors, and if they change their minds and if they become less than happy with their leadership or the direction that that party's taking, that sure, they can step. They don't have to resign. They don't have to have an election called. And all the people that are suggesting that needs to be the case, no, they're wrong. It's well within the rules, so to speak, for d'Entremont to do what he has done, as others have done in the past. But what it does do is I think, underscores the concern that I think is felt within the Conservative caucus right now. How many other people are in that caucus right now that feel the same way that d'Entremont does about Pierre Poilievre's leadership, or even the direction that the party has taken? And that's been something that not too many people want to talk about. It's another dirty little secret, I guess, within the Conservative caucus, but it's a reality that we've mentioned here on the podcast, is the Conservative Party has taken a direct turn, a very sharp turn to the right in the last 10 years or so. Some have suggested that certainly started with Stephen Harper when he was elected in 2005, and that's certainly an element to this situation. Harper, for all intents and purposes, when the amalgamation, and I use the term loosely, occurred between the Reform Party and the Conservative Party, and they melded together, the Progressive Conservatives, as they were called then, and they became the Conservative Party. It wasn't really the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party died right then and there in this country, and it was really Harper and the Reform Party that formed government. They just put a different brand name on it. That's all that's been. And they've even moved more to the right since then under Poilievre. And we've talked about some of those controversial policies or initiatives that I think make an awful lot of Canadians feel uncomfortable. And that's part of the concern and part of the dilemma, I think, for many small C conservatives, not just within the Conservative Party, but people that support conservatism from a political standpoint right across the country. A lot of them, we're told, just don't feel comfortable. That party has gone too far to the right, and they're looking more to the middle. That's the way the Conservative Party used to be. For many generations in this country, you had the Liberals and the Conservatives as the two main parties. Conservatives were center-right, and the Liberals center-left. And there was some intermingling that went on there. Well, it's a hard right now. Trudeau took the Liberal Party way too far to the left for some people's good and liking. So Mark Carney comes along, and he's moving that party more to the middle now, which is increasing, I think, the comfort level for an awful lot of Canadians who might have felt disenchanted to all of a sudden say, maybe I can support the Liberals again. Didn't like Trudeau, didn't like the direction he was taking the country or the party, but I can get used to this guy. Poilievre is doing just the opposite. He seems to be alienating small C conservatives who just don't like his brand of politics, and certainly not his style of politics too. So there's trouble happening here. And they can try to cover it up all they want, but the reality is it's something that they're going to have to face. It's a house divided within the Conservative caucus right now, and they can smile in front of the cameras and say nothing to see here. But when you get at least two people leaving the caucus, and maybe more to come, whether it's through resignations or crossing the floor, there's something that's going on there that we as Canadians are noticing, and for the Conservatives to simply say no, there's nothing really happening here, I think is a slap in the face to Canadians who can obviously see what's going on within the caucus now. So we'll watch with great interest to see just how this unfolds over the next little while, and how Conservatives respond to Poilievre and how he responds. He's getting a little mic shy, which is something very unusual for Pierre Poilievre. I know that late in the week he had a previously scheduled engagement at the Economic Club to talk about the budget, and they did the usual sit down with the two chairs there and the moderator and asking questions of the budget, just the moderator and he. But instead of taking questions from the floor, as soon as it was over, Poilievre apparently ducked out a side door and left the building altogether, which is very unlike him. But, when the heat is on, well, you see how people respond. So, great story. Interesting to see just what's going to happen as a result of this within the caucus and how this is going to affect the next round of Parliament, which is going to be happening, as we say, starting next week and probably running us right into their Christmas break. And we'll be talking about it here on the podcast as per usual. Thanks, as always, for being with us, of course, on the podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, great to have you with us. Please hit that notification bell and spread the word on that. And thank you again to the many subscribers who are jumping on board. It's great to see and great to know that you're supportive of what we're doing, and your subscriptions and your support for the podcast helps us to continue that work. Thanks to Madeline Kelly for the great work producing the podcast, as always. In the meantime, I'm Bill Kelly. Stay in touch and stay informed. Bill Kelly Podcast brought to you by Wizen's Law, personal injury lawyers. Listen, you didn't choose to get injured, but you can choose the right lawyer. Wizen's Law, 905-522-1102 or wizenslaw.com.